Okay, hello again. We're back again for another rambling from myself and Anita. We're back outside at Cheshire Folklore. We're actually sat in the wedding chapel. So if you ever fancy getting married outside here at Cheshire Woodland Weddings, this is the area that you would get married in, which is fantastic. And it's just about going green behind us as well now.
And all of these branches that you can see around the edge are decorated with flowers and so on, candles and everything, aren't they?
All lit up, it looks lovely.
Yeah, it's absolutely stunning.
And I'm pretty sure all the wood is actually taken from the woodland behind us as well when they built this. So very sustainable.
It's part of the woodland management.
Programme that he's got going on.
Yeah. So one of the things that I wanted to talk about today, Simon, is manning the birds. When you're getting them used to what they're going to be doing in the future and everything.
Yeah, so in falconry, there's a term that's referred to as manning. So that would be if you ever see somebody wandering around with a bird on the fist, with a cup of tea in the hand usually as well, not doing an awful lot, we're actually doing quite an important part of falconry. We're training that bird, we're getting that bird used to the surroundings, the environment it's going to be working in. So for us, we do a lot of demonstrations. We could be doing demonstration and there could be a brass band playing in the tent next to us or something like that. So we will try to introduce the bird as early as possible in a safe manner, so we don't adversely stress the bird too much into all these different stimuli. So you'll often see us standing in the middle of the car parks. The birds get used to cars moving around and vehicles moving around. Standing there, and you will always end up with half a dozen people speaking to you because you stood there with a bird, and everybody wants to know what it is, what you're doing, all that sort of stuff. But that actually helps with the bird getting used to having people around.
Right.
So the more we can get used to that, the better will be for the bird itself. For example, yesterday we were at a show. We took one of our Harris hawks down with us and a couple of other birds. We did a little demonstration. We had an audience of about 150 people. Never even phased the birds whatsoever. Flew in over the top of their heads. We did all the kind of daft stuff we do sometimes with birds, where we fly bys and all that sort of thing. Bird wasn't bothered at all, but that's what that bird's been manned and trained to do. On the flip of that, every single bird is an individual. So you will find that some birds can do it, some birds can't do it. Just their whole behaviour and their mannerisms can't fit into that environment. So then at that point we have to make a decision of what's going to be best for this bird and move it either to somebody who is going to be one-on-one, or it will be put into a breeding programme, or whatever's best for that particular bird in the end. But manning is a process of establishing a bond between the bird and the falconer and getting that bird used to the environment it's going to be flown in.
Right. So if you're taking a bird, say, into the car park and there's a car or lorry or tractor or something like that coming, and it sort of panics. We call that baiting, when they're flapping and trying to get away. How do you react to that? What do you do there?
The one of the biggest things is for the handler themselves to be as calm as possible, because they get their kind of cues from the person that's handling them. If the person that's handling them is nice and calm, then it's a bit like having a small child. Small child looks at mum and dad to know if it's safe. If mum and dad aren't safe, they're not happy, then child won't be happy. It's the same sort of principle. As long as the handler's happy and safe, the bird will kind of, and the more kind of time you spend with that bird, the more that bird will work with the handlers or handler, depending on who's using it. The easier the bird and the quicker the bird will calm itself down. Quite often as well, when we're manning, we will also have food with us. It's called tarring. Basically, you'll have a bit of food in your hand and the bird's too interested in eating what's on your hand than what's going on around it. By the time it's finished that food, it's then gone, oh, nothing's happened while I've been eating that, so hopefully it'll just sit there and be a lot calmer with everything else around. So it's another way in which we can use a different tool to help to man that bird and get it associated and used to the environment as well.
So if the bird, I've just said if it panics, if it's continually panicking, even though you're trying all your best and everything, at what stage do you decide this bird's never going to change, this bird is never going to get used to this?
It varies from bird to bird, from species to species, but putting time frames on it is a little bit difficult. But for instance, say we were working with a harrisawk, which is one of the quickest and easiest birds to train in principle. If we're doing something and 2 weeks down the line the bird is still acting like it's never been out, it's never been anywhere near this environment before, that's when we have to start looking at different things.
Right.
But it could be, for another bird, it could be several months.
Right.
For another bird, it could be a simple process of let's change the handler, and that might be different.
Yeah.
For instance, with eagles want to be in charge. They're big, powerful beasts. Some will like you, some won't, as we found out at the centre. But if we've got one that's training, it doesn't fly great for one person, let's try somebody else first before we decide enough's enough, it needs to go somewhere else. So we'll try different aspects like that. If it's in an environment it doesn't like, but it doesn't mind flying somewhere else, then we can work with that and potentially slowly bring it back over to where we wanted it eventually.
Right.
But it's about reading the situation, giving the bird sufficient time that it could improve. If it hasn't improved in that time frame that you give it, then it's time to take it back a few steps or think about something else.
Yeah.
But yeah, an actual time frame is a bit of a difficult one to give because it depends on the species, exactly the same as it would depend on an individual if you're introducing something new.
Right. So this has always interested me, and I think it was one of the things that first triggered me to work with birds of prey. And an example, recently within an educational setting, autistic young man, taken into a canteen and reacts negatively, has a bit of a meltdown. We call it a meltdown. He's overstimulated, he's overwhelmed, and he's overwhelmed by smell, noise, number of people. If you think about even getting a portion of food out of one of those metal tray things or a pot tray, the noise,
the clanging of the spoons,
and that we might not notice, but for a lot of people, a lot of autistic people will notice these things, but the smells can be overwhelming and so on. And the young man having being overwhelmed and reacting to it, a member of staff said, well, it's life, isn't it? He'll have to get used to it. No, I'm horrified when I hear these things, because it's sort of like, if the young person is able to communicate. I mean, we work with a lot of people who are non-verbal, so they might not be able to communicate it. But for instance, with the boys that we work with here, we would say to them, right, how can I help you in this environment? Is there anything that we can do to make it better for you? And and how do we do that, and so on. And like with the birds, the fact that they're with somebody that they trust for one thing is going to help. But if over time that young person cannot handle that environment, don't put them in the environment. And I get so frustrated with the expectations of people, even in SEN settings, and I'm sorry, I know you do a fantastic job, but there are some people within SEN settings who don't get that strip lighting is not decent lighting. So it's an environmental issue. It's overwhelming smells. It's like one of the young people told me recently he doesn't like strong smells of perfume, and me squirting perfume every morning, and sort of then I became more conscious of it. Perhaps that's not a good thing to do. So you know, I can change that, but all of those things, the noises. I mean, might that young person cope with the cope with that environment better if he had ear defenders on?
Yeah.
You know, there could be all sorts of things that might help him, or that might not be the right environment for him. He might be better off sort of finding, you know, either taking a packed lunch and sitting outside with it, or an environment that he is comfortable in, or he or she is comfortable with, or maybe finding out what's available for lunch, somebody getting his lunch for him, and then eating it in an outdoor environment, you know, so or a more suitable environment, a quieter environment. But I find it so frustrating that that we're not giving the same consideration to young people with conditions that mean that they can be overwhelmed by something, you know, and I noticed recently someone had put a post onto Facebook who has ADHD about being bombarded, you know, being bombarded mentally
with stuff.
And so and you know, people very often think that conditions like ADHD are just naughty children.
Yeah, no.
You know? And you know, if you imagine sort of where we are sat now, we can hear the birds singing, we can see the colours, there's probably noises going on in the distance because there's some work going on and that kind of thing. For someone with ADHD, wouldn't be able to concentrate in that environment because there's so much going on, and it might seem that we're just sat quietly in the woods.
Yeah.
But for them,
it's completely overwhelming.
Yeah. And yet so many people don't get it. But with the birds, you know, we prepare them to be in that environment, and we invest time and effort, don't we?
Yeah.
In ensuring that they are prepared to go in that environment, but we don't do it.
And even when we have a bird that is prepared, that's been doing it for a few years, for example, yesterday when I was flying, the place where we were flying at was a farm, and it was lambing season. So in the field behind us there was a load of lambs, which completely meant there was no way I was flying that eagle that day.
Oh gosh, no!
Because the lambs wouldn't have liked it. But then we look at everything else that's around us to make sure that the birds that we are going to use are going to be happy in that environment, and they're going to fly successfully, and we're going to be able to put on a show that everybody expects, and not end up with a bird sitting in a tree for half a day because something scared it and it's not coming back down. So we look at it constantly the whole way through that bird's flying career, so we say.
Yeah, and even on the day, like you say, on the day, you're reassessing, aren't you?
Always,
you're
constantly looking, yeah.
Yeah, and yet so often this doesn't happen with the young people that we're working with who have conditions that affect them, and that affect their senses, and and they become so overwhelmed that it restricts what they're able to do, or they have what we might refer to as a meltdown, and then people are wondering why this young person or child is misbehaving. They're not misbehaving.
No.
They're completely overwhelmed because nobody's considered whether that environment is right for them.
Yeah.
And drives me nuts. Drives me completely nuts. You know, and it's so simple, and we just do it naturally with the birds, don't we?
All animal keepers generally look at things in that sort of way. So I've been really lucky. I've trained fur seals as well. And we trained fur seals to perform in a show that often had an audience of 200-300 people easily. The females, they were there, they were present while we were doing the performance, but we never trained them in the same sense that we would train the male. Their physical ability, they would never have been able to perform, I hate that word, but perform in the same sense that the male would.
Yeah.
Because we're not training them to do tricks. They're not performing.
The behaviours, aren't
We're just doing behaviours that they would naturally do in the wild, and we're just altering it so we can show it to an audience.
Yeah.
But a female would never be able to do that, so
Yeah.
we don't even entertain training it.
Right. Yeah.
So we trained it.
Yeah.
The male was a lot more happier because he was stimulated. The environment he was living in, he was great because he had 2 females. He was happy as anything, he was. But he was also being stimulated by the training that we were doing, and it was keeping his mind occupied. But again, if something turned up on the day when we were about to do a show, and it's like, right, that's going to upset them seals, we're not going to be able to do that show today, which never actually happened. But
but you would not, you know, like you say, it would be inappropriate to have, inappropriate is probably the wrong word, but to have flown the eagle yesterday because of the environment.
Yeah.
But equally, if there was something that might scare that eagle,
Yeah.
that it had not come across before, you wouldn't risk it flying it, would you?
No, absolutely.
You know,
we wouldn't.
because the eagle would have its equivalent of a meltdown, which is fly off.
Fly off and sit in
You
a
know.
tree for several days.
Yeah.
But yeah, even to the expense of the place we were visiting not having a display, we would have done that if we
Yeah.
needed to.
Yeah.
The safety of the animals comes first,
Yeah.
and the show comes second.
Yeah. So from my point of view, let's focus a little bit more on the environment for neurodiverse young people and children and everybody who has conditions that affect them in this way. So, you know, let's look at the environment, let's look at how we impact on them, let's look at is it the right person to work with them, all the things that Simon was saying about working with the birds, let's apply it to working with children, young people and adults. So that's enough of our ramblings for today.
Take care, we'll see you again soon.
Okay, see you soon.